Ferdinand Marcos was born on September 11, 1917, in the town of Sarat in the Philippines. He grew up to become a lawyer and politician, eventually rising to power as the head of state of the Philippines. Marcos held this position from 1965 until 1986, leading the country through a controversial and turbulent period in its history. During his time in office, Ferdinand Marcos established an authoritarian regime that drew widespread criticism both at home and abroad. His administration became known for widespread corruption and for suppressing democratic processes. Many accused him of silencing political opposition, manipulating the legal system, and using his power to maintain control over the country for more than 2 decades. Despite the significant achievements and infrastructure developments that took place during his presidency, Marcos's legacy remains deeply polarizing due to the allegations of human rights abuses and the immense wealth accumulated by him and his family during his rule. The years of martial law, he declared in the 1970s, marked a dark chapter for many Filipinos who lived under strict government control and censorship. After a popular uprising known as the People Power Revolution in 1986, Marcos was ousted from power and went into exile in Honolulu, Hawaii. He remained there until his death on September 28, 1989. His departure marked a turning point for the Philippines, ushering in a new era of democratic reform and civilian government. Decades later, history took a dramatic twist when Ferdinand Marcos's son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., was elected president of the Philippines in 2022. His victory signaled a remarkable political comeback for the Marcos family, stirring renewed discussions about their past and raising important questions about memory, history, and the future of the nation. Born in 1917, Ferdinand Marcos began his academic journey in Manila, where he pursued his education with ambition and drive. In the late 1930s, he enrolled in the University of the Philippines to study law, demonstrating early on his sharp intellect and persuasive abilities. It was during these formative years that a dramatic and controversial chapter of his life unfolded, one that would shape his reputation and foreshadow the complex legacy he would leave behind. In 1933, Marcos was accused of assassinating a political rival of his father, who was also a politician. The case captivated national attention, and in November 1939, he was found guilty. But Marcos was far from defeated. He personally argued his case on appeal before the Philippine Supreme Court, and, in a stunning reversal, secured an acquittal just 1 year later. This legal battle not only showcased his courtroom brilliance, but also laid the foundation for his career as a trial lawyer in Manila, where he quickly made a name for himself. When World War II broke out, Marcos joined the Philippine Armed Forces and served as an officer during the conflict. In the years that followed, he crafted a powerful narrative about his wartime service. He claimed to have been a key figure in the Filipino guerrilla resistance against Japanese occupation. These stories became a cornerstone of his later political campaigns and helped build his image as a war hero and national defender. However, these heroic claims would later come under intense scrutiny. U.S. government archives eventually revealed that Marcos had little or no actual involvement in guerrilla activities between 1942 and 1945. This contradiction between his personal accounts and official records sparked controversy and raised serious questions about the authenticity of his wartime legacy. Despite this, his self-constructed image of valor and leadership played a crucial role in propelling him toward the highest political office in the country. From 1946 to 1947, Ferdinand Marcos served as a technical assistant to Manuel Roxas, who had just become the first president of the newly independent Philippine Republic. This early role gave Marcos a valuable introduction to the inner workings of government and allowed him to form key political alliances. It was the beginning of a long and ambitious political journey that would eventually lead him to the highest office in the land. Marcos quickly climbed the political ladder. He became a member of the House of Representatives, serving from 1949 to 1959, and then moved on to the Senate, where he served from 1959 to 1965. His leadership skills and political savvy earned him the position of Senate President from 1963 to 1965, solidifying his status as one of the most influential figures in Philippine politics at the time. Originally a prominent member of the Liberal Party, which had been founded by Roxas, Marcos faced a turning point in 1965 when he failed to secure the party's nomination for president. Undeterred, he made a bold move and broke away from the Liberals to join the rival Nationalist Party. He launched a presidential campaign against the incumbent Liberal Party President Diosdado Macapagal. The election battle that followed was one of the most expensive and fiercely contested campaigns in Philippine history. Despite the bitterness of the campaign, Marcos emerged victorious and was inaugurated as president on December 30th, 1965. His first term in office saw tangible progress in areas like agriculture, industry, and education, which helped bolster his popularity. In 1969, riding on these achievements, Marcos won re-election and made history by becoming the first Philippine president to serve a second term. However, beneath the surface of progress, cracks were beginning to show. His second term was increasingly marred by unrest. The country was shaken by a wave of student protests, demanding reforms and voicing frustration with the government. At the same time, violent activities by urban guerrilla groups began to rise, signaling deeper social and political tensions. These challenges would set the stage for even more dramatic developments in the years ahead. On September 21, 1972, Ferdinand Marcos took a drastic and controversial step by declaring martial law across the Philippines. Justifying his decision by claiming that communist and subversive forces were threatening national security, Marcos moved swiftly and decisively. The declaration marked a turning point in Philippine history, as it fundamentally altered the country's political landscape. Opposition politicians were rounded up and jailed, and the military was transformed into a powerful arm of the regime, tasked with enforcing the president's sweeping new authority. Among those who stood firmly against Marcos was Benigno Aquino Jr., a rising political figure and one of the most vocal critics of the regime. He was arrested and held in detention for nearly 8 years, becoming a symbol of resistance. The imposition of martial law drew criticism not only from political leaders, but also from church officials and members of civil society, who condemned the erosion of civil liberties and democratic freedoms. Meanwhile, unrest in the provinces was growing. Guerrilla movements intensified as Maoist-inspired communists, particularly the New People's Army and Muslim separatists, such as the Moro National Liberation Front, launched armed campaigns aimed at destabilizing the central government. These groups sought autonomy or revolution, and their actions further deepened the climate of fear and conflict across the nation. Under martial law, Marcos assumed extraordinary powers. One of the most significant was the ability to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, which allowed the government to arrest and detain individuals without formal charges. With unchecked control, Marcos reshaped the nation's political institutions, silenced dissent, and consolidated his authority through a series of legal and constitutional maneuvers. In January 1981, Marcos announced the formal end of martial law. However, the reality on the ground remained unchanged. Despite lifting the declaration, he continued to rule in an authoritarian manner under various constitutional structures that still gave him near total power. In June of that year, he was elected to the newly created position of president in a race that was widely seen as symbolic, as he faced only token opposition. This period solidified his grip on power and further entrenched his controversial legacy in the nation's history. In 1954, Ferdinand Marcos married Imelda Romualdez, a woman who would later become one of the most iconic and controversial figures in Philippine political history. Imelda, a winner of a local beauty contest and a graduate with a degree in education, quickly adapted to the world of power and politics. Her charisma and ambition complemented Marcos's rising influence, and together they would become one of the most formidable political couples the country had ever seen. After martial law was instituted in 1972, Imelda Marcos's role in the government expanded significantly. She rose to prominence and wielded considerable influence, not only as the First Lady but also as a public official. She served as governor of Metropolitan Manila from 1975 to 1986 and was appointed Minister of Human Settlements and Ecology from 1979 to 1986. During her time in power, Imelda was frequently criticized for appointing her relatives to high-paying positions in government and industry, fueling accusations of nepotism and corruption that would come to define much of the Marcos era. The Marcos family had 3 children. Their daughter Amy, born in 1955, followed in her parents' footsteps by taking on roles in her father's government and later holding a series of political offices herself. Their son, Ferdinand Jr., more commonly known by his nickname Bongbong, was born in 1957 and would eventually make a historic political comeback by becoming president of the Philippines in 2022. Their youngest child, Irene, was born in 1960 and kept a lower public profile compared to her siblings. As the years passed, the Marcos regime began to show deeper cracks. The later years of Ferdinand Marcos's rule were plagued by rampant government corruption, an economy that had stalled, and an ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor. Rural areas in particular saw a surge in communist guerrilla activity, with the New People's Army gaining strength and support from disillusioned citizens. By 1983, Marcos's health was visibly declining and public discontent was on the rise. In a bold and dangerous move, opposition leader Benigno Aquino Jr. decided to return to the Philippines after years in exile, hoping to offer a new path forward for the country. On August 21, 1983, as he stepped off the airplane in Manila, Aquino was tragically assassinated. The shocking event was widely believed to have been orchestrated by the government, and it triggered an explosion of anger and protest across the nation. Marcos appointed an independent commission to investigate the assassination, and by 1984, the commission concluded that high-ranking military officers were responsible for Aquino's murder. The killing of Aquino would become a pivotal moment in Philippine history, igniting a movement that would ultimately lead to the downfall of the Marcos regime. In an effort to reassert his political legitimacy, Ferdinand Marcos called for a snap presidential election to be held in 1986. It was a bold move intended to silence critics and demonstrate that he still held the support of the Filipino people. However, what unfolded next would change the course of the nation's history. Corazon Aquino, the widow of slain opposition leader Benigno Aquino Jr., quickly emerged as a powerful political force. She became the face of the opposition and rallied millions of Filipinos who were desperate for change and justice. As the election approached, the country watched with hope and tension. On February 7, 1986, Filipinos went to the polls, but what should have been a democratic exercise soon turned into a national scandal. Widespread reports of voter intimidation, ballot tampering, and outright fraud marred the election. Despite massive evidence of electoral manipulation by Marcos's supporters, the regime declared him the winner. The result was met with outrage both within the Philippines and around the world. Marcos's claim to victory was deeply discredited. As protests erupted and international pressure mounted, the situation reached a boiling point. The Philippine military fractured, with some factions remaining loyal to Marcos, while others sided with Corazon Aquino, recognizing her as the rightful president. What followed was a tense standoff that gripped the nation and captivated the global community. The standoff came to an end on February 25, 1986, when, under pressure from the United States, Marcos and his family fled the Philippines. They were flown into exile in Hawaii, marking the collapse of a two-decade regime. Just 3 years later, in 1989, Ferdinand Marcos died in Honolulu, far from the country he once ruled with an iron grip. After the fall of the Marcos regime, investigations revealed the staggering extent of corruption that had taken place during his time in power. Marcos, his family, and close associates were found to have embezzled billions of dollars from the Philippine economy through a network of fraudulent schemes and shady deals. In response, the United States government indicted both Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos on racketeering charges. In 1990, Imelda stood trial but was acquitted by a federal court. Despite the controversies and legal battles, Imelda Marcos was allowed to return to the Philippines in 1991. Her political ambitions did not fade. In 1993, a Philippine court found her guilty of corruption, but the conviction was overturned in 1998. Even more remarkably, she made a political comeback by winning multiple congressional seats during the late 1990s and again in the 2010s, proving that the Marcos name continued to cast a long and complicated shadow over the country's political landscape.